Okay, hi y'all. My name is Jordan Lamb. I'm currently an intern here at the Center for Conservative Women. I study government at the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome. I am pleased to introduce this afternoon's final speaker, Liz Wheeler. Liz Wheeler is the host of one of the year's most highly anticipated new podcasts, The Liz Wheeler Show. She is the voice of reason for millions of Americans as she discusses important stories that no one else is telling. Liz has always had an interest in politics, publishing her first political commentary piece when she was just 15 years old. She received a degree in political science and homeland security from Penn State. Liz became a household name in 2015 with the start of her highly rated cable show, Tipping Point with Liz Wheeler, on One American News. In this role, Liz cemented her place in America's political landscape, speaking to hundreds of millions of people each year and delivering the undiluted truth about everything from communism to COVID. Red Alert Politics listed her on their 30 Under 30 of conservative stars. She published her first book in 2019 titled Tipping Points: How to Topple the Left's House of Cards. It quickly became a national bestseller. Liz is a devout Catholic. She is married and the mother of a beautiful baby girl. Her new show is vibrant, engaging, and just what the conservative movement needs at this precarious hour. Please join me today in welcoming Liz Wheeler.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you to the Center for Conservative Women. It's one of my favorite places to speak because it's so inspiring to see all of you show up wanting to be the strong women that God created you to be. Thank you to Jordan Lamb, a wonderful introduction. I appreciate that. Thank you to Michelle Easton, without whom all of this would not be possible. And I want to give a big shout out to her new book, How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. I gotta tell ya, one of the ways to raise a conservative daughter is to come to this conference, so I brought my baby who's backstage. Just to give her a little head start here. Thank you to Julie Stewart, who did all the logistics and planning for this conference. That's a tough job, and she does a wonderful job at doing it. And again, thank you all for taking the time for showing up here today. So I want to start out today just by asking you guys a question, and my question is, and please show of hands, this is not rhetorical, how many of you want to be wives and mothers someday? Okay, how many of you want to be President of the United States? There we go. How many of you want to be a CEO of a company? Okay, I'm going to tell you why I asked that question shortly, but I hope that you did a little glance around the room to see how many of your fellow young ladies answered the question one way or the other, because it's very important. It's very important because as young women living in the 21st century, as we are, we're facing an unprecedented attack on our femininity, our God-given femininity. From the abortion giants profiting off of convincing vulnerable young women that in order to achieve material success, we must abort our preborn babies, or to achieve equality with men, we must embrace abortion, to leftists weaponizing gender theory to take an aim at us, biological women, by telling us that biological men who identify as women are the same as we are real women. It makes for a unique era that we're living in, a unique challenge that we all face. On one hand, actually, it's never been a better time to be a woman in the United States of America. We are free. We are free to make our own choices. We are equal under the law. We can drive. We can vote. We can work. We can choose to stay home with our children if that's what we want to do. We are prosperous. On the other hand, the very core of who we are as women, as daughters of the King, with each of us a unique role to play in his kingdom on earth, is under assault. And that brings me to my second question. How many young women here today, if you're comfortable answering this question, of course, how many are Christian? So the vast majority of you are Christian. And this is very important to remember, even outside of church, outside of church, in society, in everything we do. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's not something that makes us different in the bad way. That's something that we need to use to inform every piece of political activism that we do. This idea that the left gives us, that there's a separation from church and state, and that the meaning of that means checking our Christianity at the door, that's not true. So remember, as daughters of the King, we have a unique role to play in his kingdom on earth, and that's under assault. We're especially under fire as Christian young ladies, and therefore, because we are especially under fire, we are especially called to participate in this fight that is going on in the United States, this assault against our womanhood. And so what do I mean exactly by an assault against our womanhood? Well, I give a couple of examples, but I also mean as Christian conservative women, we are bombarded from every side. Our every belief, whether it be religious, whether it be political, is challenged, or ridiculed, or even condemned. Our instinctual, God-given desire to get married, to love our husbands, to get pregnant, to adore these precious little babies that are growing in our wombs, to give birth and to nurture our families, is belittled publicly. It's demeaned in our culture from every side. We're told if we don't bring home a paycheck that's equal to or greater to a man's paycheck, then we are not achieving our quote-unquote full potential. We're told that being a stay-at-home mom is a stain on our resume. We are told that our worth is measured in society by our ability to accumulate material wealth, even if that takes us away from our families in a way that we don't want to. We're told we won't be as successful as young women unless, on the extreme, unless we abort our babies so that we have all the free time that we want. We're told to avoid marriage, avoid having kids, until our careers are quote-unquote settled. And spoiler alert there, that's never gonna happen. Your career will never be settled. We're told that we can't achieve career success without the government redistributing wealth and playing identity politics, because we're told as young women that we're victims of institutional sexism, and there's nothing we can do to avoid that, nothing. We're told instead, in order to be liberated, that we must embrace sexual promiscuity. We're told if we're pro-life that we're displaying our internalized misogyny. We're told our Christian faith in Jesus Christ is a bond instead of a liberation. So today, I'm here to tell all of you that everything that I just said is absolute freaking garbage. Every single word of it, absolute garbage. So what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about the 10 things that pop culture doesn't tell us as young women. The 10 things that every single one of us should know, 10 things that should underpin almost every one of our actions, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, or whether it's political, because you can't untie those three things. So thing number one that pop culture does not tell us as young women is that being a woman is amazing. It's not a disadvantage. It's absolutely amazing. 6 months ago, actually 6 months ago from yesterday, I gave birth to my baby girl. And it's perhaps the coolest thing that I've ever done. The single coolest thing that I ever did. And this was after my husband and I had struggled to conceive for 2 years. We had lost our first baby, which is devastating. And I remember thinking, before our struggles to have the baby, I remember feeling, I'll admit, vain of my body. I remember feeling like, well, it's all right if I don't have a baby for a few years, because my body's probably going to get ruined then anyway, so we're okay. Well, after having gone through what we went through, struggling with infertility, and then carrying this beautiful little girl and giving birth to her, let me tell you, beauty in your body and perfection in your body is about what your body does. It's not about what it looks like. So that's something that our culture does not tell us as young women. Your fertility is not something private about you. Your fertility is part of what makes you a woman. Your fertility is miraculous. Your fertility is beautiful. And so today, you'll not hear this often outside of conservative Christian conferences. I'm here to tell you that hormonal birth control, that as young women we are told is almost a rite of passage for young women, it's dangerous, it's bad for your body. There are other ways to handle almost every single reason that anyone would go on birth control. Don't do it. Don't do it. You will harm your mental health, you will harm your physical health, and you will possibly harm your ability to carry those beautiful babies that we all want to carry. A couple of statistics here. Researchers in Denmark have found that hormonal birth control causes a 70% increased risk of depression. Anybody who's been on a birth control pill, and by the way, this is not meant to condemn anybody who is. This is just information because we are not fully informed in our culture about the repercussions of these actions. So it's never too late to learn, it's never too late to change your mind, it's never too late to go off of this if you're on it for any reason. But anybody who has been on it knows what it feels like to be on it. You walk around in a cloud, you feel moody, your body doesn't feel as good. You're not imagining that. That's what the drug is doing to your body. There is no other pharmaceutical intervention that is intended, its sole purpose is intended to disrupt an otherwise healthy function of your body. The most miraculous function of your body, your fertility. So not only can it cause mental health, the suicide risk goes up if you're on birth control. It can cause infertility, especially depending on what type of birth control that you're on, and it can also increase risk of blood clots, which can increase risk of a heart attack. These things happen in our country. We're just not told this as young women. We are told that we should go on this so that we can be, as the left says, liberated by being sexually promiscuous without having the consequences of having a child. And so, as I said, I'm here today just to say, don't believe that. It's nonsense. Your body is beautiful just the way it is, including its function of fertility. Similarly, sex. Have we talked about sex in this conference yet today? Well, here we are. Here we're going. Sex is not casual. Sex is not casual. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's a beautiful thing. But save it for your husband. Save it for your husband, and this doesn't just have to do with your religion. All of you are Christians, so you know the biblical teaching is to save sex for your husband. But also, from a purely secular standpoint, from a practical standpoint, save sex for your husband for the following reasons. Sex has emotional impacts on women specifically, differently than it has on men, and women are very damaged by our hook-up culture. And here's why. Chemically, when you engage in sexual activity, women's bodies produce oxytocin and endorphins, right? And these chemicals are bonding chemicals. They are intended to bond one human being to another, right? They're intended to bond the woman to the man. The problem with these, not really the problem, the God-given design with these hormones is they're value-neutral hormones. You know what that means? It means you will feel that bond regardless of whether there's another emotional bond, whether there's a marital bond, whether there's a relationship bond, whether there's any love between you, you will feel bonded to that other person just by nature of the chemistry that happens inside your brain when you are engaging in a sexual activity. And then we know from science that think of a piece of tape, for example, that when you bond and break, and bond and break, and bond and break, you lose your ability to bond properly. Again, think of that piece of tape. It becomes less sticky and less sticky until it simply doesn't work properly. That essentially is what happens to us if we engage in the hookup culture. We're told that it liberates us, but truthfully, scientifically, like I said, even putting Christianity aside for a second, which I suppose we don't need to do at this conference since the majority of us are Christian, but scientifically, what pop culture tells us is not true. It's not healthy for us in any way. It's actually dangerous for us. In addition to that, from a societal standpoint, marriage is the single best anti-poverty program that has been ever invented. Ever. Meaning children are 82% less likely to live in poverty if they have a married mom and dad. So instead of pushing government welfare programs, we ought to be encouraging marriage. We ought to be encouraging people, save sex for marriage so that you don't have babies out of wedlock, so that these children are given the best advantages, the best opportunities in our country out there, so that they don't suffer from poverty. But we're not told that. We're not told that as young women, so we ought to talk about it among our friends and our families, and we ought to talk about it amongst each other so that we know the truth about this. So that's thing number one that we're not told. Thing number two, you are not a victim. We are not victims. Period. We're not. I know that I wrote the date down because it's such a ridiculous date, I didn't want to commit it to memory. March 21st of every year is what the left tells us is equal pay day. And you've seen all those memes, right, with like 73% of the dollar and the other third of it cut off, because that's what the left claims women are paid compared to a man. Or, soccer star Megan Rapinoe, she claims that she should be paid equally as the men, even though people don't watch those soccer games, they only watch men's soccer games. So we're told that we're a victim because we're told we're paid less. And I'm not going to repeat what Kelsey just told you, because everything that Kelsey said is accurate. But make no mistake, the gender pay gap does exist. It's real. It's real, but it's not because of sexism. It's because of choices that you and I make, whether it's choices that we make in college, choosing careers that typically pay less, like an educator or a nurse, that typically pay less than a doctor or an engineer. Whether it's choosing shorter commute times, whether it's choosing less overtime, whether it's choosing a job flexible enough so that you can prioritize your family. These are choices women consciously make. And we're not penalized for them. It's not a penalty. We are being paid equally for what we do. We just typically work less than men. Even women who work full-time versus men who work full-time, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, men who work full-time actually work 2 more hours every week than women who work full-time. So when you adjust for all of these differences, men and women are paid equally. In fact, in 98% of America's 150 largest cities, single women under 30, now the stereotype here would be unmarried and without kids, right? Single women under 30 actually earn 8% more than men, than their male counterparts of that age. Which shows us, I think, that, well, once the choices start factoring into it, then women get paid less because we choose to work less. We base our careers more around our family. So again, the gender pay gap is real, and it's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. It's real, but it's not based on sexism. And that brings me to point number 3. Because those are our choices that we're making, never be ashamed of your career choices. Never be ashamed of the fact that every single girl, I think barring none, I didn't see anyone who didn't, in this room raised her hand when I said, do you want to be a wife and mom? Every one of you. But when I asked if you wanted to be president or CEO, it was maybe 5. I'm here to tell you, that's okay. That's absolutely okay. And that's why there's a gender pay gap, because we have differences in what we want to prioritize, differences in what we want out of our lives. And in fact, the only sexist part of it is that the left tries to make us copy men's choices. They tell us that we don't have, that our worth is being unfulfilled, that our potential, that we haven't reached our potential unless we make the same choices as men to have an equal outcome of men. That's not what actual equality is. That's what equity is. Equity is equal outcome. Equality is equal opportunity. And you and I today, as young women in America, we have the opportunity to choose what we want our lives and our careers and our families to be. We're so lucky, actually, that we're able to balance, that we're able to create flexible schedules, that we're able to do both if that's what we want to do. That's what actual equality, that's what actual empowerment of women in careers is. It's making sure women have the choice to do what they want when it comes to their career. It's not forcing women to make one choice or the other. And so thing number 4 that pop culture won't tell you, there is sexism out there. When you get a job after college, you will face sexism. But there's a difference between institutional sexism and individual sexism. Institutional sexism does not exist in our country anymore. We are equal under the law. There's nothing that we are denied because we are women, nothing that we are disallowed from doing because we are women. But there are individual jerks out there who are going to be rude to you because you're a girl. There are also individuals who are going to be rude to you because of your race, or rude to you because of your hair color, rude to you based on any immutable characteristic. There's always going to be somebody out there who is unkind because of some characteristic. You can't please them all. And the thing is, it literally doesn't matter because we have equality of opportunity. So if you run into someone who's rude to you based on your gender, just shrug, so what? Men are fallen. Not men. Mankind is fallen. Sexism is a sin. You're never going to eradicate individual sexism, but that's what's so beautiful about the free market in the United States, is if you're in a situation where you're facing an individual who's treating you poorly for any reason, you can get a job somewhere else. You don't have to give that person or allow that person to benefit from the fruits of your labor or subject yourself to that treatment. So there is sexism, but it shouldn't hold you back. Don't think twice about it. Number 5 is something that I'm pretty sure we all agree on in this room. You do not need abortion to succeed. Ever. There's never a good reason for an abortion. There was a video that went viral about 1.5 years ago of Michelle Williams at the Golden Globes. Do you guys remember this video? She gets up there and holds her award up and essentially says that the reason that she achieved this award was because she quote-unquote exercised her right to choose, or whatever euphemism she used for abortion. And to me, that's the most insulting, disempowering message to give young women, as if we are not capable of doing both. Of course we're capable of doing both. I've only been doing it for 6 months, but I'd like to think I'm doing okay so far. You certainly can do both. You do not need abortion to succeed. And in the case of Michelle Williams, I said this at the time, I'm never going to be rude to someone who has done something that has caused themselves so much pain. But holding up that shiny statue She sacrificed a soul for that. That's never worth it. You never, never need the material wealth that she has achieved at the cost of human sacrifice. So thing number 6 is men are not the enemy. We're told this so often, aren't we? We're told this so often. Men are not the enemy. Do not demonize men. And do not reject masculinity, God-given masculinity. So how would we define some of the characteristics of God-given masculinity that pop culture tells us are bad? You and I would probably describe them as chivalry and protection and sacrificial love. And if not, that's how we should define them, because that's what they are. A couple of years ago, I believe this was 3 or 4 years ago, I'm not sure of the exact date, do you guys know who the Young Turks are? Great laughter. Appropriate response. So Anna Kasparian at the Young Turks did a video mocking me, because I think I had a video go viral on the Women's March, saying how the Women's March was just the abortion march. It wasn't actually standing up for Christian women, conservative women, Trump-supporting women, Second Amendment-supporting women, Israeli women, yada yada. Anyone aside from abortion groupies, she does not consider to be a real woman. She made a video mocking me, and at the end of the video, she said something like, and this is probably not the exact quote, but she said, "Oh, little Lizzie, why don't you go back to the kitchen and make your husband a sandwich?" She intended this to be demeaning, and I gotta tell you, I laughed my head off when I heard this, because I literally do make my husband sandwiches. And he likes that, and that's a good thing. You are not weak as a woman if you accept protection from men. And if in response to that protection that men give us, if you love them, if you respect them back, if you serve your husband, if you serve the men in your life, if, yes, you make them sandwiches and cook them dinner, that doesn't disempower you in any way, shape, or form. Because not only did God make men and women different, think about how men's minds are wired. Why do they protect us? They protect us because they consider us to be more precious than they are. And why do they consider us to be more precious than they are? Not because we're weak, not because we're fragile, but because our fertility, our bodies, the essence of our womanhood is so precious to them that they would be willing to lay down their lives in order to save ours. So when a man opens the door for you, closes the car door after you, or is excited because you might have burned his dinner, but at least you made the effort, maybe speaking from personal experience, that's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing. So don't demonize men, uplift them and allow yourself to be cherished and treasured because you deserve it. That's part of who you are as a woman. Thing number 7 that pop culture doesn't tell us, it is not transphobic or bigoted to stand up for biological women. It's not even a matter of, I'm trying to think how to phrase this properly. It's not even a matter of targeting specific men who identify as women when we say it is unfair for biological men who identify as women to play in women's sports. How many people here have played high school or college sports? A lot of us did. Now, what did we all experience while we were playing sports? We all experienced the fact that no matter how elite we were, no matter how good we were, boys probably 3 or 4 years younger than us could beat us, right? Doesn't make us bad at sports. It just shows the difference in the biology of men and women, that men are stronger, they have more muscles, they have denser bones, they are simply wired to be physically stronger in general than women are. And so when these biological men who suffer from gender dysphoria, which must be a tremendous burden to suffer from, and we should extend compassion to them, but when they identify as women and want to play in women's sports, we have to stand up for each other. We have to stand up for our sisters and our daughters and say, you know what? That's not fair. Because you're not a woman, and if you're playing in this sport, if it's contact sport, women could get hurt. And regardless, it's essentially going to obliterate women's role in sport at all, because every trophy, every gold medal, every match or game or meet or whatever you have it will be won by biological men, and our role will become obsolete. So I always thought, and this is a little bit of a side note, I always thought that the best way to defeat the transgender ideology, the ideology, not the people, remember, I always thought that the best way to defeat the transgender ideology in this country would have been if Donald Trump had declared himself a woman while he was president, so that he could claim to be the first female president. because all it takes apparently is identifying as woman. Then the left would have rejected the whole thing. So it seems to me that that was an easy fix, but he didn't take my idea. But it is not transphobic to respond in a compassionate, sensible, scientifically based, just way defending biological women. Because I don't know about you, but with all due respect to individuals who suffer from gender dysphoria, I don't want to go in a locker room or a bathroom where there are biological men. It's a violation of my privacy. It's potentially not safe to my daughter because it could be taken advantage of by creepy men who aren't actually transgender but are in there because they're allowed to be in there, and it's okay to say so. Thing number 8. This is a very, very important part of your careers as you're embarking on your professional life. Remember, relationships and family are always more important than power and money. Always. Barring none. Now, this, of course, goes back to thing number 2, the gender pay gap. If you properly prioritize family and relationships, oftentimes that will impact your career choices, and that's okay. Because at the end of your life, you're going to look back, and sure, you're going to be proud of the time that you spent in the professional world, your accomplishments, the differences that you made in this country, but the biggest impact you as a woman will ever have is your family. And so, I have no anecdote for that, no story. I speak from my personal experience and from my observation. 100 times out of 100, your family and your relationships are more important, so invest in those now. And I'll tell you why that's very important in a moment, to invest in them now. Number 9 ties all of this together, and that is, do not fall prey to the feminist narrative about fulfillment. Feminists tell us that you will be fulfilled if you achieve the pinnacle of success in your career first, if you delay marriage and put off having children, if having children at all. Don't do that. Don't fall prey to that narrative. Don't hurry to get married for the sake of getting married. Wait for the right one, and then marry the right one. Then have children, and raise that family together. And go to church as a family, and eat dinner as a family. And nothing will serve this nation better than that. Nothing. Thing number 10, to always remember, again, this is not something to be checked at the door when you enter into politics. This is not something to be checked at the door when you enter your professional life. Remember that you are a daughter of the King. You're a daughter of the King, and as you discern your role in furthering his kingdom on earth, remember that each and every interaction with another person that you have, you are an example of Christ's light. If that person has never heard the gospel, if that person has never met a Christian, remember that you are the impression in that person's mind. You are a daughter of the King. Every single one of you. And it's a very humbling thing to think about if you sit quietly and think, all of my qualities, good and bad, all of my strengths and all of my weaknesses, God specifically made me just like that because there's a role here on earth in his kingdom that only I can fulfill. And that shouldn't make us feel proud. It shouldn't even make us feel special. It should make us feel humble to think that we are such an important, integral part of his plan on earth. And if you use that mindset front-facing as you enter into politics, you enter into your career, you enter into a profession, you will have a bigger impact on the people around you than if you address policy or politics in any other way. So never forget that you are a daughter of the King. You have a unique role to play in the kingdom of God as the woman that God made you to be. So those are the 10 things. Now, I'm no expert on this sort of thing. We're basically in the same age bracket. You're the same age as my youngest sister, I believe, more or less. But I did want to talk just a little bit about my show, the Liz Wheeler Show, the new show that I have, and how it came to be, how I was able to, or how I balance family and work, and what I have done since I was a child and a teenager in order to be qualified for this kind of work. And again, I'm big on lists here, as you can tell. Now, first of all, I don't know if you guys have seen my show. If you haven't, I encourage you to watch it. I hope you do watch it. It's called The Liz Wheeler Show, and you can get it wherever you listen to your pods. Probably Apple is where I get mine. But there are 5 things that I've done in my life that have enabled me to weather the storm. And when I say weather the storm, we know as Christians, we know as conservatives, that the more effective we are, the more intense and brutal the barrage of hate towards us will be. And it's not easy. People who say that it's easy are lying, or they haven't truly experienced it. There are people who handle it better than others. But there are 5 things that I have done that have both qualified me to be in the position and then enable me to stay balanced while doing my show. And here are the 5 things. Read as many books as possible, as many as possible. I'm not talking about just How to Raise a Conservative Daughter, although you should read that book. I'm not just talking about conservative books in general. Read as many books as you possibly can on both sides of the aisle. Because you not only want to understand what we believe as Christians and conservatives, you want to understand why we believe what we believe. And then on the flip side, you want to understand not only what the left believes, you want to understand why the left believes what they believe. And if you can equip yourself with the information for those 4 things, the what and the why on both sides of the aisle, you will be the most educated person in the room, you will get the job that you want, and you will be effective. And you can do that at home, you can do that on your phone, you can do that just by reading. That's what I did. Again, these are things, you can do it a different way, these aren't necessities, but these are things that I did that helped me to be successful. The next thing is you can join a church, you can practice your faith. You should have this community around you, a prayerful community of people of faith that share not only your beliefs, but that serve as spiritual protection. Because what we do fighting against Marxism, what we do fighting against, essentially the devil, what we do up against the abortion lobby, we need spiritual protection because we will be attacked. So join a church, practice your faith, read books deepening your understanding of your own theology so that you can grow closer in your relationship to Jesus Christ. And make sure that you have friends outside of the industry. This is not to say that there aren't lovely, lovely people in the industry, and I'm friends with many of them. But make sure that your identity is not solely within conservative politics. Make sure that you can be, for me, that I can be regular old Liz. Not TV host, not speaker, just regular old Liz with my friends and family. Not just my nuclear family. I have friends from childhood, friends from high school. Make sure that you have long-lasting relationships with people outside of the industry where you can just be yourself and kind of check your profession at the door. That is perhaps, aside from the practice of your faith and the relationship with your family, that will be the single best protection that you will have when you are attacked online, when you are fighting this fight and you're facing a barrage of criticism and hatred, is you can simply turn your phone over and go back to your friends and no one's thinking about it. Not you, not them, nobody. It's not going to affect who you are or your actions if you have that close community of friends. And of course, this is somewhat the same, is solidify those family relationships. If you have a contentious relationship with your sister, figure out why and fix it. Because 5 years down the road when you need her, you're going to want to be able to call her. You're going to want to be able to say, hey, can you fly out to me? So fix those family relationships. Cherish them. Our family relationships we take for granted, but there's nobody else on earth who is biologically and spiritually given the responsibility to support us the way our families are. And yet oftentimes over silly squabbles, maybe you shared a room and you got on your sister's nerves, and maybe I'm talking from personal experience. But nobody else is going to be there for you the way that your family is. So make sure that you're not only cherished by your family in those relationships, cherish them. Be there for them in the same way, because they're going to be facing, regardless of their career, conservative Christian women are all going to be facing the same barrage of hate. And then, of course, the real professional advice is get involved. I hardly need to tell you guys that because you're here, but get involved. I know Twitter is, a toxic hole essentially, but it's also really fun. Get on Twitter, start getting involved in the conversations, all over social media. Write op-eds, submit them to blogs, ask people for advice, start talking to, thought leaders who you respect. Just dip your toe in. Don't just observe from afar. Don't wait to feel comfortable, because you never will, believe me. Get involved, whether that's on the local level, the school board, whether it's, I was appointed by the mayor to the Board of Zoning Appeals when I was 21 or 22 in my hometown. I just wanted to get involved. That was a position that was available. It was a really cool experience. I'm glad I did it. It served me to give me a lot of information since then about how government works, because local government is but a microcosm of big government. So get involved. And finally, Embrace your femininity. This is obviously what the speech was about, but now more than ever, we need conservative, courageous, caring, smart, driven, loving women who know the value of our womanhood. Now, all of this may not seem overtly political. You know, I didn't come up here and give you a list on how to debunk socialism or the reasons that climate change is a hoax or why the Green New Deal is ridiculous or anything, you know, about critical race theory, et cetera, et cetera. No. But this is actually more important than politics. It's more important because we as young women in America today, as I mentioned at the beginning, have a unique, precious, incredibly critical role to play in saving our nation. Because femininity and our very womanhood is under assault by the radical left. They are targeting us for who we are. And we can't just play defense and gently deflect their lies. No. We are called to live boldly as the women we were created to be, to embrace and celebrate our womanhood, because our value as women, as daughters, as sisters, as wives, as mothers, as patriots, is vital to the security of our free nation. And the most wonderful part of this battle that you are preparing to fight in, that I am fighting in on a daily basis, the best way to fight back against the radical left, to live counterculturally, if you will, in a pop culture environment that typically belittles women, is simply to be exactly who we are. Exactly who we were created to be as women of God. And so that's my advice for you today. Go out there and be the woman that God created you to be. Thank you. Also, before we take questions, if y'all could do me a solid and subscribe to my show on Apple Podcasts, and not just subscribe, here's the part that a lot of people don't like to do. Could you please leave me a 5-star review or a 5-star rating and a review, because that helps us go up the charts on iTunes, which helps more people discover the show and helps more people hear the reality of the thing. So if you could do that, that would be great. Also, if you took pictures, tag me on Instagram. Thank you. You guys want to do questions now?
Hi, thank you so much.
Hi.
So my question is, I've heard a lot of people say that, like, in general, women are, they're strong within and weak without, and men are, like, the other way around. Especially, like, on the men's side, what is your take on that?
I mean, I don't think we're weak without. I'm not. I mean, no. In all seriousness, that's a pithy response. But of course, objectively, men typically are stronger than women physically. That's just a biological fact. Aside from a few women who can defeat a few men in physical competitions, that's how we were made. Sure. But let me tell you, after laboring and giving birth to my daughter, I will never feel physically inferior again. Dude, let me tell you, birth is the craziest experience. Super crazy experience. And I know that this word is tossed around a lot in our current environment, but it's basically the most empowering thing that I've ever done. It's incredible to just let your body do what it was intended to do, to feel those contractions, which don't listen to anybody, hurt like hell. Okay, so let me back up for a second. I did my birth without drugs because I had this misguided idea that women exaggerated the pain of childbirth. I thought maybe, yes, okay, I'll laugh, go ahead. I thought maybe that women exaggerated it because men could never disprove us, right? No, that's not true. It hurts. However, when you are experiencing those contractions, just taking over your body, you feel like you're going to crack in half, and you let it happen, you let this wave roll over your body, and then with or without your permission, sorry to the men in the room, you push and give birth to this child, you will never feel weak again. Never. You will never feel physically weak again. It's the most incredible experience. So I don't think that women are weak on the outside. I think that we're incredibly strong. And I don't think that men are weak on the inside either. I think that men and women complement each other. Women, of course, tend to be more emotional. We tend to be more of the nurturing type, more relational than men. But it doesn't mean that that's a weakness of men. It's simply how they fit into the jigsaw puzzle, how we fit together, how we complement each other, or at least how we should. But the most important part of that is don't feel weak just because you're not going to win a soccer match, because you're going to give birth and they're not.
Hello. I was wondering, what is something that either earlier in your career or kind of earlier in your life before you started your career, something that kind of either a mistake that you made or a bump that you came across that kind of made you who you were, or something you maybe not regret, but something that kind of impacted the way that you think now?
Oh, good question. Let me think about this. I think the hardship that has impacted me the most was not something that I brought on myself by a choice that I made. I don't talk about this often because it's none of anybody's business. But in high school, I was diagnosed with a pretty serious genetic mutation. It's essentially a cell disease, and I was very, very ill with that for quite a few years. I fortunately was set to graduate early from high school anyway, so I did. And so it didn't impact my ability to graduate from high school. But I wasn't able to go to college after that for, I'm not sure if it was 3, 4, 5 years, because I was, actively sick with this and battling it before it went back into remission. And that shaped who I am. I mean, my family shaped who I am in a good way. My faith shaped who I am spiritually and enabled me to be able to walk through that hardship. But I think when you experience that kind of loss of freedom through no fault of your own, which is what illness does to you, right? It either physically, in my case it was physically, for some people mentally, whatever it may be, when it restricts your freedom, you get an understanding of how precious freedom is and how precious opportunity is and how precious it is to be able to go out into our country and say, this is what I want to do and this is who I want to be. And oftentimes we take that for granted because most of us are healthy, right? Most of us are able to do the things that we want to do. And the type of health problem that I had, it's very similar to an autoimmune disease, just for frame of reference here. But there's essentially not a pharmaceutical treatment for it. I manage it. I mean, I still have it. I manage it through diet and nutrition. Not that you want all this TMI. But there's no pharmaceutical intervention for it. So my family, especially when I was in high school, spent a great deal of money on more naturopathic types of treatments because there simply wasn't any other option. And that cost a great deal of money because that's not covered by insurance, right? And so that additionally gave me an understanding and an appreciation for a free market society where my parents, my dad especially, was able to work, and he's a small business owner, and he was so responsible with his money for so many years that he was able to take care of me. He was able to spend that money to, this is why I don't talk about this, to bring me back to life. And that would not be possible in a medical environment or in an economy where he couldn't do that. And so I would say that was a pretty big factor in shaping my appreciation for liberty, my defense of capitalism, my defense of the free market, my defense of medical freedom, my defense of just our ability to live our lives the way we see fit. Because if you're in a situation where you feel like you're out of choices, you don't want to have the government standing there saying, well, this works for most people, but sorry, you're an aberration, you're this small fraction, we're just going to ignore you. You want to be able to meet up with, doctors, whether it's traditional medical doctors or naturopathic doctors like it was for me, and innovate and figure out how to cure that. You want to have the resources necessary to be able to do that. So that's huge in shaping who I am and why I will always defend the free market, because it's allowed me, through my parents of course, to be standing up today. Taurus? You better have a lighter question.
Yes, thank you for being here today. I was wondering what you thought about the government requiring women to register for the draft.
Oh, great question. I think it's a terrible idea. I think it's stupid. I'm against it. And here's why. 2 reasons why. First of all, as we said, men typically are physically stronger than women. And if you put a woman in a men's combat unit, then men's intrinsic desire to protect that woman can sometimes actually put that unit at risk, right? So we have to be very careful with the balance between affording women an opportunity to do what they want, which maybe is join the military or serve in combat, with recognizing that the military is not a social experiment, and it's no one's right to serve in the military. The military is a killing machine. The intention of the military is to win wars. And so we want to make combat units and whatever else you have as effective as possible. And you don't want to put a woman in the middle of that simply for the sake of saying, oh, I wanted to be there. Because honestly, sometimes her being there, and I say this as a woman, as an independent woman who has a career, who wants women to be able to do what they want, sometimes that woman, through that choice, could be putting other men at risk. So that's sort of the combat aspect of it, but I'm not sure that women in combat is something that we as a nation need to have. And I know the counter argument is, oh, Israel has women in combat. Well, Israel faces an existential threat to their liberty every single day, and they have to have that number of people. And that changes the equation significantly, right? So when it comes to the draft, this is more philosophical. We have to ask ourselves as a country, do we want to be sending our women to the front line? Do we want women to be dying before men? Because when I was talking at the beginning of the speech, I said men have this intrinsic desire to protect because they cherish us. They treasure what we are as women. And doesn't sending women to the front lines against their will, which is what would happen with the draft, doesn't that culturally fly in the face of this intrinsic God-given design of men protecting women? So I'm against it. Does anyone disagree with me, by the way? Because if so, I want to know why. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak to us, and actually thank you so much for being so vulnerable. That kind of authenticity can be rare up here in DC. So I actually wanted to ask you something similar. Maybe it's a little psychosomatic, but what steps are you taking or plan to take to raise a conservative daughter?
Well, I brought her here today to listen while she naps. I don't know if you can have the information soak in while you're sleeping, but some of the things I'm going to do is, I'm going to teach her the same things that I talked about today. I'm going to teach her that she's a daughter of the King, that she's a woman of God. I want to teach her to be godly. I want to teach her to love God with all her heart and all her mind and all her strength. Keyword there is all her mind. I want to teach her to critically think, to think for herself. I want to educate her, not only in the way of the Lord, but I want to educate her so that she's not taken advantage of mentally, that she knows how to debunk a narrative, that she has the courage to do that. I, want to surround her by a loving family, which we are so blessed to have. Both my husband's family and my family are wonderful people. I'm going to take her to church and educate her and embrace all the traditional family tenets that there are. I'm going to keep her away from the television. There's no way in hell she's getting on Instagram. I probably will be a strict mom. Should surprise no one, I think. I hope, I don't know yet. My husband and I have not made the decision yet, but I would certainly lean towards homeschooling. I was homeschooled. It's also a learning as you go experience. I try to listen to her now as a baby. I think our culture actually values something that I have found very strange as a new mom. They value this idea that your baby should be independent. Like, oh, is your baby sleeping all the way through the night at 3 months? I'm like, no, dude, she's 3 months. Of course she needs me. And so I try to really listen to what her needs are, because that's something that I want her to be able to trust as she grows older, so that she can have that security and community in our family as she goes out into the world, that she knows that she's going to be listened to by her dad and by me.
I just want to again say thank you for being here.
Of course.
So I have a pro-life blog, and
Do you?
doing
Good job.
And I actually posted one of your quotes, and I just want to read it for everyone in the room who hasn't seen it. 'Cause it's so good. My choice as a woman to be pro-life is not respected by the women who claim to champion choice, because my choice is not the choice they want me to choose. And for me, when we're talking about conservative women, and then we're also talking about men protecting women, how can we, because men think women are complicated, and sometimes we are.
We are.
And we're not
They're
on
right.
the same page about abortion. We're completely split. So me and Ashley, who both work at Susan B. Anthony List, and we're very passionately pro-life. And I guess, how would you answer how we tackle, telling men that we do want to be protected and our child needs to be protected. And I know that's a big question, and we're trying to figure that out right now, but it's like, how can we establish that trust with men,
Mhm.
but also kind of get women on the same page so that men are more supportive of that?
Are you talking personally, like personal relationships, or culturally, like the big picture? Or both?
Both.
So personally, this is something that I've learned since being married. You can't wait for men to pick up cues or read your mind. You have to just tell them. See, the men in this room are laughing right now. They know that I'm right. You have to communicate very openly. So what I've found with many men is the reason that they're pro-abortion, or the reason that they have given up chivalry, is because men's fundamental fear is rejection. They're afraid of being rejected. Women are afraid of being rejected in a very different way. We're afraid of being rejected only in the sense that we're like, okay, thank you, next, and we'll go back to our girlfriends, right? And then we'll be like, are we fat? No, we didn't think so, right? That kind of rejection. Men view rejection very, very differently. If you say no to a man, for example, if he wants you to date him and you say no, he feels that you have rejected the essence of who he is. This is just universal truth about men. It's very weird. You'll have to ask God why he made that design. But that's a very big difference between men and women. And so oftentimes men are pro-abortion. And I'm not talking about the scuzzbags who want to use it to be promiscuous. I'm talking about the general cultural attitude. Men can be pro-abortion because they don't want to articulate a viewpoint that's going to cause them to be rejected by women. And they are told culturally that in order to support women, in order to empower women, in order to help women feel liberated, that they should be pro-abortion. So the first thing that we can do, both personally and culturally, is just be very open about the fact that we really appreciate when, I really appreciate when I'm on an airplane and I put a bag in the overhead compartment and I'm not wearing shoes that make me look taller than I am, when a guy says, hey, do you want me to put that in the overhead compartment for you? I'm like, yeah, I do, thank you. That's really helpful. Doesn't hurt my feelings, not a commentary at all on my capacity as an independent woman. It's just a nice, protective, gentlemanly thing to do. So we can articulate, hey, we really appreciate chivalry, we really appreciate you being a gentleman, we really appreciate protection, and we really respect that about you. And that's what men respond to. When they feel respected, they're going to feel encouraged to do whatever action they've taken. So I know that that's not a written down plan of how you can launch a cultural revolution, but it really, most things start at home, most things start with us. So start by expressing you should be pro-life. Men should protect their unborn children. Men should protect other people's unborn children. Men should protect women, and we really appreciate that. She's been waiting a long time.
Thank you so much for coming to speak to us today.
Of course.
And my question, so I know nowadays more women are going to higher education and going to graduate school. I'll be starting graduate school in the fall, but personally still planning on taking time off later on, career for family purposes, etc. And so nowadays, you spoke that you very much, I'm in agreement as well, that family relationships are more important than career. I think there's a big focus, like I know even in my graduate school, they have a separate career services department. It's a whole like career. And sometimes talking to people, it's hard to mention that, we're thinking about taking time off, or we're not so absolutely like 100% gun-ho about career, especially within the culture of liberal universities and workplaces. How do you counter that? How do you, give a sense of even more, like I just say left on the top of inclusiveness, but I think it's also very much
real inclusiveness is what you mean.
a great opportunity and a great possibility as well to really prioritize family and relationships, even potentially at the expense of career. How does that, in your experience, how have you countered that successfully? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, good luck with grad school. It's probably not going to be easy. And I think it's very admirable that you are open about the fact that you want to prioritize family. So what I would say is, first of all, when you make choices that are countercultural, you can't always expect to be validated even by these institutions. So there may be nothing that you as an individual can do to change your university's mind, right? And you do have to be cognizant as women that when you go into these, when you go into your profession, unless you're working here, or unless you're working for Susan B. Anthony, unless you're working for something very Christian, very conservative, that values women, that values the family, that there may be a prevailing feeling that reflects the leftist narrative, right? And you kind of have to do what I said about sexism, is you have to just say, okay, sometimes it's not the time and the place to tell someone that you're going to, you know, potentially interview with that you plan on taking time off 5 years down the road. It's really none of their business. It doesn't make a difference in the quality of your work at this time. So you don't have to proclaim that if you feel that it's going to impede you from the opportunity that you want. That's on the professional level. On the personal level, you can always talk. If you're surrounded by other women in grad school who you feel would be disrespectful or maybe even ridicule your choice, you can ask them, oh, why? Why is that something to be ridiculed? Why is that bad if I do that, if I'm making that choice? Shouldn't that choice be respected? Isn't that what original feminism should have been? Not necessarily just encouraging women to go into the workplace, but making sure that women have the choice to choose the workplace or the home or some hybrid of both. And so those types of things, as I said, not that we don't want to battle in institutions, not that we don't want to battle in corporations, but sometimes it's okay to just nod your head to those types of narratives if it's the prevailing narrative and you feel that it would cause you to lose out on an opportunity, and then just do your thing and be confident in it, regardless of what other people think. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but sometimes I just shrug if people want to have different opinions. I'm just like, okay, I'm going to still do my way though.
All right, thank you so much for speaking today. I really enjoyed your talk. So I'm also from a Catholic family, homeschooled. It's a very big family.
Nice. How many siblings do you have?
I have 12 siblings, and 8 of them are sisters.
Oh my
We're
gosh.
all like extremely independent, very hard driven. And my question does actually concern that. So right now I have a couple sisters that are just extremely liberal, but on the other end, I also have siblings that are like so conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's more often than not this extreme of, why do you want to get married young? Because I'm getting married this May.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Why do you want to throw your life away, throw your career away by having like a marriage at such a young age? But
How
there's
old are
also
you?
I'm 22.
It's not that young.
But then there's also the other extreme. I really would love to pursue a career, even as a mother, of course, never putting my career over my family. But the one side of the family being shocked and horrified that I want to have a career, and then the other side that's being horrified that I want to be a mother. So what do you recommend to find just kind of a good balance, but also knowing what is a good balance and not being ashamed of either of them and like both sides?
Yeah, and that's a hard situation with family. It's a lot easier to let criticism roll off your shoulders when it's not someone that you love, when it's not a family member. So that certainly, it sounds like a difficult situation. I would say, first of all, you just have to understand for yourself why you're doing what you're doing, right? Don't do something because it's expected of you. Don't do something because someone else thinks that you should or should not do it. Understand why you're making the choices that you're making, so that regardless of what opinions are flying around you, you don't start to second guess what you're doing. Now, this doesn't mean that, especially for family members, that you can't receive wise counsel, right? Sometimes we want to make decisions that maybe our parents are like, well, have you thought that fully through? Or on the flip side, sometimes our parents are like, hey, you've never thought of this. Maybe you want to try this. We see that you might be a good fit here. Doesn't mean that you have to reject wise counsel that you receive from family members, but understand why you're doing what you're doing so that you can almost immediately, logically, putting the emotion aside for a second, you can logically understand that when criticism from one side or the other comes towards you, you can say, is that valid criticism? Do they have something valuable to say about what I'm doing, or are they speaking in a flawed way, and if so, why? And I know that that's difficult to do, what I just said, in the heat of an emotion if someone's criticizing you. But if you can set that emotion aside for a second and be like, wait a second, that comment hurt my feelings, or it made me insecure about my choice. Is there validity to what they're saying? And if not, then you have to say, am I still confident in my choice? And you have to answer yourself and say, yes, I am. Then you can choose, do I want to engage in this conversation with a family member and try to get them to see my point, or do I want to just say, you know what, I'm going to respectfully and boldly and with poise pursue what I want to pursue, and they can pursue what they want, what they see fit, you know? Because I think a lot of times what's bothersome or what can be emotional when a family member disagrees is that you feel that your family knows you very well, right? Family members are supposed to know each other almost the best, and so when they see you doing something that they think is wrong, that's the easiest way to feel discouraged or insecure about what you're doing. So just make sure that even, I don't know, this is obviously personality driven, but sometimes you can write a list of, this is what I'm doing and this is why. And then if you get a specific family member who is giving you flack for, yes, we're on camera. flack is the word, giving you flack for a decision, you can write a list of that too, and then you can analyze, is there validity to that or not? And for you, there might not be, and then you just have to be confident and move forward. And it sounds like you'll have a wonderful husband to support you in your choices. As for the work-life balance, I don't know if I'm the right one to ask. My daughter's 6 months. I'm like just learning this too. I do a very hybrid schedule. I do my show prep from home, and right now my sister is nannying for me. My younger sister's nannying for me. So when I'm writing on my laptop preparing the show, I see my daughter all day long. I breastfeed her all day long. I know I'm very fortunate to be in that situation. Some women would probably criticize that. Some men would probably criticize that, but it's a wonderful balance so far for me and my family because I actually feel like I can be almost a full-time mom and almost a full-time career woman, right? Which usually the choice is, well, do you want to do one or the other? Which do you want to prioritize? But embrace flexibility, embrace creative ways to do both. And women's intuition is very strong on these matters. You'll know if you have struck the appropriate balance. You'll know in your heart if you feel uncomfortable with how much you're away from your baby or how much you're away from your career. You'll know. And so if you are in tune with, I consider it to be the Holy Spirit, right? The still small voice in your heart. That's what women's intuition is, right? If you're in tune with God's voice in your heart with the Holy Spirit, then you'll know. You'll know that balance. So there's not a hard and fast answer, I think, to what the proper balance for you and your baby, your potential babies, your future babies, and your husband and your family is, but you'll know. Alright, we have time for one more question.
So I go to a small Bible college, and I think kind of everything that's happened in these last 2 years, I found myself kind of frustrated with being around like-minded people who I know agree with a lot of these values that we're talking about, but there's a high level of complacency, specifically with women, but kind of what you touched on about men and rejection. I also see that. I was wondering if you had any advice on a gracious but also very truthful way of encouraging other young people who share in these values to not be so complacent about them.
Yeah, that's a good question because especially I think, and this is for better or for worse, right, that Christians who are, yes, political, but primarily Christian, have stepped away from pop culture the last 30, 40 years. I would do the same thing. So I don't mean this necessarily in a critical way, but because we've surrendered pop culture because we don't want our children and our families exposed to that, it's created a little bit of an artificial sense of what goes on in our country or the direction that our country's headed if you are not in a situation where you're exposed to what the radical left is doing, right? So I'm not advocating that that people need to expose their children to this. I'm not going to expose my daughter to it. I'm going to shelter her from this stuff from pop culture until she's old enough to have the capacity to handle this and process it. But I think if you're talking about small groups of women, then you have those conversations and you say, listen, as Christians, we're able to go to a Christian school. We have academic freedom. We have freedom of speech. We certainly have religious freedom. All of these values that make up the essence of our lives, the essence of who we are, they are under assault. And it can be very difficult for people to process the idea that there are societies without these rights protected. There are societies where people don't have the right to go to church and to create Bible colleges and to raise their children, to even have as many children as they want. And so just giving young women the understanding that the responsibility does lie with us to create the environment and culture, right? Like, we're the ones that create homes. We're the ones who are generally the primary caregivers of our children. We are rearing the next generation. That's why there's that saying, the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. We have a deep and precious and challenging calling to help shape our country. And so making sure that women are aware of that calling and not just the practical responsibilities of like, oh yes, I'm the one that gets up in the middle of the night because my husband works, or I'm the one that gets dinner on the table. Those are great, but we have a philosophical and spiritual calling as women too. And sometimes I think women forget that, or maybe are not aware of it, or aware that their gifts and talents from God should be used in this fight too. There's nobody that isn't political, right? There are people that aren't interested in political science. There are people that aren't interested in working on Capitol Hill, but there's nobody whose who doesn't have something to contribute to politics, because politics is just life, right? Politics is, of course, downstream of culture, and it's our role to create the culture, to not only defend it from the radical left, but to make sure that we're playing offense and instilling in the culture what we want to be the tenets of the next generation. And so I think for a lot of women, they feel like, oh, I wouldn't know what to do, I wouldn't know where to start, I have no interest in debating, I'm not interested in policy, therefore I'm just gonna leave it to someone else. That's not my role. My role is, X, Y, Z. And my message would just be, there's not only a role for everyone, there's a need for everyone. And as I said at the beginning of my speech, as a daughter of the King, he's created each and every one of us with very specific gifts and talents that he wants us to utilize to further his kingdom on earth. And part of that is defending the liberty of our country. I don't know if that's helpful or not. And I think that's all that we have for today. Thank you so much for having me. It was so wonderful.